Secret Circle.
Welcome to The Secret Circle with me, Luke Decker, the podcast where I chat with authors, filmmakers, musicians, and more about the art of their craft and let you in on some of their secrets. Tonight's guest is crime fiction author James Benmore. He's the writer of the popular Dodger series featuring the classic Dickens character, the Artful Dodger, and most recently published his new book, Ask for Mercy, a modern-day thriller. James, welcome to the show. There we go,
Hey,
James.
great to see you.
You too,
Thank
buddy.
you so much for having me. It's a real honor to
my pleasure.
be first guests on your new show. It's very exciting.
Number 1, episode 1 of The Secret Circle.
Wow. What
James
an
Benmore.
incredible- Yeah, love it already. So if I'm number 1, at the moment we're just a circle of 2, just the 2 of us.
Yes. In the circle. It will slowly grow as the weeks progress. I've got to it's fun. It's fun putting this new show together, and I'm excited for the future guests that are going to be on and for people to listen. And it's a very different. It's not very different, but there is a nice. It is quite different to the previous show that I was doing, the Luke Deckard show, which is no longer a thing, but it lives online and people can find it and go back and listen to me rant about movies and TV shows.
Yeah. Well, I was on your one about the Silence of the Lambs, and that was great.
Yes.
Really enjoyed that one. Yeah.
We did Silence of the Lambs. We did a panel review of the Glass Onion, which you liked and I did not.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I liked it. I felt that I was defending it because
no one else liked it.
I was the case for the defense. I didn't love it, but it was fun. Yeah, but great. Yeah, this is cool.
So one of the questions that I ask everyone that I bring on is sort of a philosophical question about, why do you, James Benmore, write? Why do you feel the need or the compulsion to write stories?
Oh, wow. That's a big question to start with.
Yeah.
I guess there's lots of different answers to that. I mean, I've always loved reading. I think if you love reading and you love stories and you love, and across all different mediums, well, at least I, had the urge that could there be any better job in the world than telling stories? I remember feeling that at young age, that it's just like, I feel that when I write, it's like playing with toys. When you're a kid and you've got your action figures, and I can see you've got some action figures behind you. So it's kind of like, I know you're a big collector, but when you're a kid and you're playing with your Star Wars toys and your Masters of the Universe toys, and you start making up stories with those characters, and you start, crossing genres, and you start, and even though that's just playing, that's also creativity. You're using your own voice, and I always loved that, and I never wanted to give up. And for me, telling stories is me carrying on playing with toys. I always feel as though I'm kind of like they're little puppets that I'm controlling and stuff. But I guess as for the more mature reason, I guess, is that I do love, as I get older, I do think it's really important in life, and the thing that fiction can provide is seeing the world through the eyes of someone else, someone who is unlike you, someone who has a different perspective, like imagining yourself. The empathy of fiction is really important, both as a reader when we read books that are written and about people quite different to ourselves, but also when we write and we step in, we see behind the eyes of someone quite different to ourselves. And that's been a thing that's always really, motivated me as a writer. Who am I going to see the world through next, kind of thing.
Yeah, I like that. It reminds me of I'm in the process of finishing my PhD, and hopefully we'll finish, and hopefully we'll not fail. But in the very early days of that, I was speaking with a woman who her project was incredibly fascinating, and it was actually kind of about that. It was about like empathy and writing and reading and how reading books and seeing the world through other perspectives. She's basically her research was about seeing how that can affect a person's empathy with as they grow up. So looking kind of like kids and reading and stuff like that, which I think is really important. I think when I look back at like my life and growing up, I always kind of champion, and you will know this, but I always champion Star Trek as one of the big reasons why I kind of see the world the way I see it, because that was such an inclusive world, and and
It really
therefore, go on.
No, Star Trek really deserves a lot of credit for being incredibly diverse before
Yeah,
diversity was mandatory. Like,
yeah,
it's kind of like
yeah,
everyone's diverse now, but back in the 60s or, even more
yeah,
recently, that it's
yeah,
always been a real kind of, let's imagine the world through a Vulcan's perspective, but also
yeah,
through, a really diverse
yeah,
cast.
yeah, yeah,
So no, I get
definitely. And like you totally get the idea that like what they're trying to do, and like you also get the, as even as a kid, you get the analogies. You get, this is meant to
mm,
represent this group in our real real world and stuff like that, which I think is incredibly helpful. And I think yeah, I think you're right on with that. Like stories, stories for empathy purposes, and helping people understand and helping ourselves understand, I think is hugely important. um
I also think detective
mm,
fiction, which you and I both have a lot of experience in, because we've both written private eye novels, and we
yes,
both read an enormous amount of that genre. One of the things I
yeah,
think about that's really good, that's similar, is that you've got the detective figure who goes into a world, who says, "I'm going to investigate this
mm,
community, this this society, this whatever it is, this class of people, or whatever it is they're going into investigating." And that's
yeah,
another way of entering a world that we might not necessarily enter ourselves, and sort of
yeah,
vicariously seeing a new world, a different world, and having them sort of pick up the stones of that world and seeing what's
yeah,
underneath. That's
yeah.
another real.
Yeah, I,
Um,
I agree. That's definitely one of the reasons particularly love PI fiction more than the police procedural, far more than the
that's it.
domestic thriller.
Me
I
too.
like. Yeah, I don't know about you, because we'll get into this, because your new book, Ask for Mercy, is a PI book.
Private
Um,
eye.
Private Eye. So there's just something about that particular figure who is a bit Batman esque. They're not really bound by the law. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
And they
yeah.
get it just,
I yeah. I
yeah.
like the idea of the private detective. What I find attractive about them, and they're kind of old fashioned. Like, they're not fashionable necessarily, the private detectives these days. But what I've always liked
Mhm.
about them is that they're kind of half cop, half criminal. They're kind of, in
Yeah,
some ways, they're investigating a murder, so they're on the side of truth and they're trying to get to the bottom of something. But there's also this idea, as you say, that they're not quite bound by it. Like, your
yeah,
private eye character could break and enter someone's
yeah,
house to get some clues, and it's not
yeah,
implausible in the way that it would be outrageous for a policeman character to do that, unless they
definitely.
were particularly, that unless that was part of their character.
Yeah,
Um, like, I think the idea that the half cop, half criminal thing has always excited me about it. Like, yeah, like you say, they're
yeah.
a bit dodgy. They're not always on the level, and
No.
that's fun about it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a really fun quote from one of the very first like hard-boiled detectives called Race Williams, who was a character that came out in the 1920s, and he describes himself as a halfway house between the cops and the criminals. And I
Oh, right.
he
Oh, right.
he the author really writes kind of like quite cheesy and hammy, but like that's such a great line. Like he has a few really good
Yeah,
lines in his
that is good.
collection,
Yeah.
but I always loved
That's
that.
I love the independent spirit of them. Like, they are
Yes.
kind of not cops and they're not criminals, and they could go either way. Like,
Yes.
that's really fun.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Let's before we dive too much more into Ask for Mercy and more PI stuff. You wrote the Dodger books,
Yes.
based on the character, the Artful Dodger.
Artful
Um,
Dodger twist. Yeah.
what I'm
Uh,
I'm I'm curious what that experience was like, because that's very wildly different to the kind of book that Ask for Mercy is.
yeah. Well, it's interesting you asked me that now, of all times, because I've recently finished rereading them. 10 years. So my Dodger books came out 10 years ago, roughly. Can you
Mm.
hear that bell going in the
I We
background?
can hear the bell, and it's fine.
It's
It
fine. Yeah.
adds
Yeah. It's
atmosphere.
yeah,
Yeah.
Victorian grand. So yeah, let me explain. I was doing a creative writing master's course at
Mm,
Oxford, and for my degree, I'd studied a lot of Victorian literature, and I'd grown to love Dickens. And
mm,
in particular, I really love Dickens's criminal characters. I don't so much love Oliver Twist, but I love the criminal
right.
contingent from Oliver Twist. But as with a novelist like Dickens, obviously he's 200 years old, and there's things about his work that are challenging
Mm,
for the modern reader. One is, look, for example,
yeah.
with Oliver Twist, there's the anti-Semitism of Fagin, and the kind of, he's very it's not a very progressive depiction of a Jewish person. And but I was always really interested in the idea of telling, not necessarily retelling the story of Oliver Twist, but
Mm,
showing that world through a different perspective. Again, as I was saying earlier, imagining seeing the world through different eyes. And I have always loved the character of the Artful Dodger. Ever since I saw Oliver as a kid, the musical, and there's that actor in it, Jack Wilde, young child actor, who was so charismatic. You know, when you're a kid and you watch that musical, or if you see a school play of it, you don't want to be Oliver. You want to be the Artful Dodger, because the Artful Dodger is cool. Like, and Oliver is not cool. And I always like the idea of the kind of class element of, like, he's a slum kid. He's picking pockets because he's grown up with that. Now, he is a baddie. Dickens has him as a baddie, but he's a fun baddie. Fagin is kind of a fun baddie. And I like the idea of him. When I was doing my course, I only needed to write like 5 chapters of something. So in those days, I didn't even really have a plot. I didn't really know what would happen, but I thought I'll generate a bit of a plot for what happens next to the Artful Dodger. In the book, he gets packed off to Australia. He gets arrested for stealing a silver snuff box. He gets packed. Well, you don't even see that scene. Then he gets packed off to Australia. And then when he comes back, he never comes back. That's the last we hear of him. And so I thought, oh, my chapters for this course. And at the time, I wasn't thinking about getting published. I was purely thinking about graduating from this course. What can I do that's a bit snazzy? And I thought, I'll tell the story of the Artful Dodger returning to London 5 years later in his own voice. So it was kind of a voice where I'm having him using Cockney slang, not just Cockney slang, but archaic Cockney slang. You know, terrible punctuation, but also because he's grown up, he's a big reader, that he's got this kind of Victorian flourish to his language. So he'll use a big word, and also, but he'll get the grammar wrong. Like, so he's got the vocabulary. He almost treats language like a thief. He hears somebody using a big, interesting word and thinks, I'm going to use that word myself, because why shouldn't I? But because he's not very well educated, he's kind of get it. So it was kind of a voice experiment. But by the time I'd finished the course, I'd fallen so much in love with that voice and that character. And I was lucky that an agent heard me read from the piece at end of year graduation, and they gave me their card. So looking back, what's odd about my story, my 2 separate publication stories, is at this time, that could not have been easier. I basically got up at a public reading for the course, read 4 pages, and then an agent from quite a big agency came up and gave me his card. And then he said, you know, if you're interested in me, send me the rest, what you've got. And if I like it, I'll try and get a book deal for you from an agency. And that's exactly what happened. And looking back now, it's almost laughable how spoiled and how lucky I was. I didn't think I realized at the time that that's like the jackpot situation. I thought, oh, this is what it's like when you're a writer. You write a few chapters, someone hears it, they give you a book deal. Like, I didn't realize that, like, the struggles I've had since then. I'm astounded by how lucky I was in those days. But yes, that's pretty much what happened. So this guy, really good agent, told me he'd get my book published, and he did. The publisher was a mainstream publisher called Quercus, who were riding high at the time because they just published The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series. So they were kind of like, in terms of crime fiction, they were the big cheese at the time. That was the biggest selling crime novel at that time, or at least it was in recent memory. This is pre-Gone. So that was really cool. And I got to write these 3 books. Wasn't a huge advance, I'll be perfectly honest with you. I never made a lot of money out of mainstream publishing, but there was incredible status attached to have a big publisher. It was an imprint from a publisher. Offer me a 2-book deal initially for Dodger, the second book. I've got them here. Let me show you for people who are seeing this on YouTube.
For those watching.
This was Dodger of the Dials, the second book, the sequel to it. I wrote them in quick succession. And then I got a 3rd book deal for this book, which is called Dodger of the Revolution. And I wrote them between 2013 and 2016. And again, it was kind of a tough time because, like I say, it was nice to have that prestige of that, but I wasn't getting paid an enormous amount. So it was kind of a tough period. But, you know, I had all the things that when you're young and you imagine being a novelist, you imagine imagine your book launch in a bookshop and having all your friends and family there, and you do a reading and blah, blah, blah. And then you go into Waterstones the following week, and there it is in hardback. And you go to Foyles, and there it is. And I had all that. Where it wasn't was W.H. Smith. W.H. Smith said, like, they decided they weren't going to publish it. And the reason they weren't going to publish it was about a couple
Stock
of weeks.
it. You mean stock it?
Stock it. Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
they were going to stock it. The reason they weren't going to stock it was the same month that my book Dodger came out, Terry Pratchett released another book called Dodger, which was not like my book, but was Victorian and played with Dickens. Much more of a children's book. Mine's not a children's book. Mine's a historical crime thriller.
Yeah.
But obviously you can imagine, like, you know, choice between me and Terry Pratchett, the most beloved best-selling authors in Britain at the time. I did not win. So I got and looking back, that phone call, a couple of weeks before it was published, my agent, my publisher phoned me up. This is great news. Some independent publishers are going for it. Foyles is going for it. Waterstones is going for it. They're all going to stock it. On the bad news front, WH Smith are not going for it. And I remember looking back, like, I don't think I realized this at the time, but when I look back on it now, I realized that was the phone call where I was basically being told, this isn't going to happen. This is not going to be a bestseller because of that.
Right.
Like, from that moment on, it hardly got any marketing from the publishers. It wasn't really pushed at all. It was really hard to sort of get out in front. Obviously, the sales, you know, one of the biggest retailers, high street retailers, not going for it. I think the entire publishers just suddenly lost interest. I don't know that for a fact, but I've always looked that phone call as being akin. This is a bit of a weird analogy, but you know, in the boxing, old-fashioned boxing gangster movies, the scene where before the fight, before he's even laced up his gloves, someone comes into the back room of the boxer and says, so you're going down in round 5, and that's the way certain people want it. It was like the fight was from that point. It was like, I realized that in publishing that's a big thing. That decisions get made on, well, if WH Smiths haven't gone for it, we're not going to bother marketing it. We've got other books we're going to, you know, publisher like Quercus publish a heck of a lot of books per year. And if they think yours isn't the one that's going to do it for them, they will tune it. And that's the thing I've learned from being in mainstream publishing. And from that point on, I have to admit, even though I had all the lovely ego boost and the sort of vanity of having this mainstream publisher go for my book, it kind of was kind of downhill from there a bit in terms of the Dodger books. Like, they didn't really, no one really reviewed them in terms of like the mainstream press, and they didn't really get very good sales. And at some point, my agent got in touch with me and told me he was no longer going to be an agent. And so he left. And so I took an agent. I can only assume it's because clients like myself weren't making him enough money. He chose a different path entirely. And then the imprint, Quercus, the imprint of Quercus that were publishing my book, the editor, who was enormous support throughout my entire period, he's the guy that really liked my book over there. Great guy, but he moved on. I don't know if he lost his job or what happened, but basically they folded that imprint and he was gone. So by the time this third book came out, Dodger the Revolution, I had an entirely different editor who, you know, she seemed like a nice lady, but I don't got the impression she cared at all for my book. It was an assignment for her, not something she loved. And the publishing on it, it's a nice cover. It's like, it looks pretty cool. I'll give them that. But the proofread on it, it was terrible. Like, there's more mistakes in it than in. And I used to have friends of mine get in touch with me and go, I'm embarrassed for you. How there's a mistake on every page. There's a punctuation mistake. Sometimes there's people. They just didn't. There was no proofread. There was no edit. They just rushed it out because they had a contract. And so it was actually, I sort of feel in a relatively short time, I had the kind of best and worst experience of mainstream publishing. I had the highs of, the sort of vanity stroke of, having this wonderful experience, but then also the suddenly being dumped. It was like in a really good relationship, suddenly getting dumped. So it was kind of a weird experience. And I know for a fact that Dodger the Revolution didn't sell many copies. So that was a tough thing to come back from as a writer. And I think, my opinion, and it's just my opinion, not that many people have read this book, so there's not that many people who can argue with me. I think it's the best of the three. But reading it back, and I think, I'm like, wow, it's really good. Apart from the terrible editing, terrible proofreading, or the lack of proofreading, I think it's good. The funny thing I ought to tell you before we move on from this, talking about bad proofreading, is that I dedicated my first book to my parents, Dodger. I said to my parents, Henry and Ethna, which are their names. My second book, I dedicated to my brothers, Michael and Harry. My third book, I wasn't in a relationship, and I thought, who am I going to dedicate the third one to? And around that time, I was made a godfather for the 5th time. I thought I'm going to dedicate it to my godchildren, which will not just be some of them were babies, will not just be for them, but it will be for the parents that asked me to be god. I thought that's a nice thing, and then there's 5 of
Mm.
them, so I put in for my godchildren and said the names of the godchildren. When that turned up in hardback, and this is pertinent to what we're going to talk about with self-publishing, because this wouldn't happen with self-publishing, but
Yeah.
they printed all these copies. When it turns up, the inscription read "For my grandchildren" instead. Now they met me, and I'm going to say I was 35 at the time. You
Yeah.
can be a grandfather at 35, I suppose, but 5 of them, like it was a
Yeah.
bit sort of wow. How old they think I am, but like
That's a bit much.
So that was incredibly annoying, and that was just as it went to. They effed up the dedication, and I looked at my copy. My copy said that I sent them said godchildren,
Yeah.
so they screwed it up. So that's
I've
what I
had
mean.
that happen before. Yeah.
It was
It's
not
not cool. My old publisher did that with a couple of books where there was a mistake, and I was like, this is not in my version that I sent over to you. What the
Yeah,
F happened?
it's how it happens. Like they just
Yeah.
fiddle with it, do they? And someone makes a mistake and no one checks. I don't know, but I think it's a lack
Basically,
of.
yeah.
I mean, it was a lack of a proof. I don't think it got proofed. And I now know, because I'm now a self-publisher, the proofreading costs money. Like my proofread cost me, I don't know if I should say, but let's say, I will say, it cost me the best part of £1,000 because it's a big book.
Yeah.
It's 500 book, and it cost me 500 quid. Sorry, £1,000 to get cost. So that's a lot of money. So you can imagine if they're. So I sort of get it. I get that they're looking at my series going, it's not making a lot of money. We're not going to push this. Why are we spending money on a proofreader? That's clearly what happened. They just pushed it out there and said, oh, screw it. Which is annoying.
I suppose what interests me about your whole experience is, and I know other people who are traditionally published and I've had similar or slightly similar issues with their publishers and particularly with editing. I think editing is one of the big things that, because your book was 2016, last book was 2016, wasn't it? And around that time I was meeting more and more authors. I had a few books out by that point as well, and was meeting more and more people, and I kept getting this feedback from people like, oh man, like they're not editing this work. It's just like, I'm putting all my money and resource into editing this, and these are people that are like yourself who are with big publishers, and it's fascinating to me. And I think again, like you were saying earlier about like they sort of decide early on whether something's going to be a hit or not, and it's like, because WH Smith weren't going to stock your book, they were like, nah, Terry Pratchett is gonna come in and sweep the floor anyway with his Dodger book. This isn't gonna, what I sort of wonder though is I wonder how things would be, if it would have been any different if these books are coming out now with the power of social media, with annoying things like TikTok, but Twitter and Instagram and whatever else there is. Would that or could that boost? There's more possibility of you connecting with bloggers and things like that versus relying solely on the publishers.
Yeah, I think you could be right. And I mean, hopefully I'm going to find out in the next few months, because I'm planning on, I've got the rights back to the Dodger books after 5 years of them doing nothing with it. And I've set up a new self-publishing company myself called Topsoil Books. And that's the reason I've been rereading them and re-editing them. And I'm getting them properly proofread and edited this time, particularly the third one, which is the one that really needs it. And I'm going to, employ a lot of these. I don't know if I'm a TikTok guy necessarily, but certainly I'm going to be pushing it a lot harder on social media. I'm going to be doing a Facebook ad campaign, targeted ads, which did not exist really in 2016, or if it did,
geez, no, barely.
Yeah, certainly an author like myself would not have been benefiting from it. The idea that you can target now using the algorithms of Facebook or Amazon, or readers that like Victorian fiction, that like Dickens, like historical crime, that's so powerful now. And with Ask for Mercy, I'm doing it next week. I'm starting a Facebook ad for this, where you can target people who like private eye thrillers. You can target people who like mystery thrillers, people who like books set in London, people who like books with female protagonists, people who like books with whatever, like whoever I can tell the ad who my like what best-selling authors I think my book is like, and therefore
Mm.
they
Yeah.
know who that kind of book. So if you say, I think somebody who likes Val McDermid would like this book, then they
Yeah.
can target those people. That's incredibly powerful. And you're right, that did not exist 10 years ago. So that's a
No.
real tool. I mean, for the self-published author and the mainstream author,
Yeah.
that's the thing that's really useful. Just the idea, like, but I'm sure mainstream publishing now do targeted ad campaigns because they're crazy not to. Like, it's a real, real weapon.
They will, but I'll be honest. I know people who have to do them themselves. I know traditionally published
Yeah,
authors who have to do it themselves,
yeah.
which to
The
me
way,
is just bonkers.
yeah. Well, that I guess brings it around to our wider conversation is like, if you are paying for the adverts and if you are doing
Yeah,
everything and if you're promoting it, and if self-publishing is becoming easier and easier every year, what is
yeah,
mainstream publishing for? Bearing in mind, I've had the experience and I've had all the good things, and
yeah,
I've also had a lot of the bad things. And this
yeah,
time I'm a little bit less precious about whether or not my book is going to be seen in Waterstones or in W.H. Smith. I'd love
yeah,
that, obviously, and that's not
yeah,
out of the question for a
no,
self-published author, but
yeah,
it's a little bit like I kind of feel as though there's a different business model that has even emerged within the last 10 years. And it
yeah,
makes you wonder, like, why are we authors? And as you know, I don't want to jump ahead, but like with Ask for Mercy, I spent a year trying to get it published the mainstream way, the way that Dodger was published.
yeah.
If I could have gone back
Well,
to, the
yeah,
reading that the Dodger and read it out and had an agent come up with me the thing, that would have been wonderful. But that just wasn't happening again. That lightning wasn't striking twice.
yeah.
So
Let's I do want to talk about that, but let's dive
yeah,
first into a little bit of Ask for Mercy, because I really am interested in the kind of the publishing, the publishing struggles. But
yeah,
yeah, I don't want to. I think that's a bit more interesting if we kind of explore that just
yeah, yeah.
a little bit later. So let's talk Ask for Mercy.
Yes.
This is a PI book set in modern day London. There, if you're watching on YouTube, and you can see the very very cool cover that
The
James is
paperback,
holding up there, the
writer, and it's
paperback,
also available in hardback, which is quite
glorious
good too.
hardback as well. Look at that.
Glorious hardback, yeah, perfect for the coffee table.
Yes. Or a good doorstop.
Yeah,
No, I'm joking. So my first question is why I'm interested in the why you moved away from, historical Victorian stuff to gritty modern day thriller tones of hard boiled fiction. I'm why the big change?
yeah. Well, I mean, I guess at the time it didn't feel like that big a change. It is a big genre change, but I mean, truth of the matter is, it's a London-based crime story, which is kind of
Hmm.
what the Dodger books were.
Yeah,
It's way more of a mystery than the Dodger books were. The Dodger books have mystery elements, but that's not like the thing of them. They're a bit
yeah,
more crazy, a bit more kind of sort of action-packed rather than mystery
yeah.
necessarily. And like you said, they're not noirish, and the world of Ask for Mercy is much more realistic than the world of
Mm,
Dodger. The world of Dodger is very
yeah,
heightened in the way of a Dickensian pastiche.
yeah.
Um, I guess like one of the reasons is that I've always liked the idea of having a writer's life and looking back on my and having written lots of different things. And one of
Mm.
the benefits of not being terribly successful as a writer with my original three books is that had they been incredibly, if they'd been bestsellers, I probably would have written like 6 or 7 of them by now. And I
Yeah.
think I probably would be a bit sick of writing essentially the same story, essentially in the same voice. I would have, I mean, I think the books themselves, I've tried to diversify the stories as much as possible. But,
Mm.
at some point, you're going to start repeating yourself.
Yeah.
And I actually think that one of the benefits is like when I realized, like, hey, I need to sort of start again. I need to write something new. So let's do a genre that I really love, crime. Let's do present day because I'd always wanted to
Mm.
write in present day. Let's do third person instead of the sort of Cockney archaic voice. Let's do a third person narrator. Let's
Yeah.
pick another character who's really quite different and give it another go, give a different genre a bash,
Yeah.
just for my own creativity as much as anything else. Like, can I write in another genre? What does it
Yeah.
even look like? After having written 3 books as the Artful Dodger, telling in his voice, I was kind of curious to know, can I write
Mm.
as a third-person narrator? And so that was it, really. I think I'd read a number of really cool crime novels around that time. I think I
Mm.
was looking for a commercial genre where I
Mm.
was thinking, what's a genre where ridiculously I was thinking, like, what's a genre where every mainstream publisher is going to look at it, because every mainstream publisher does crime, in the way that
Yeah.
not every mainstream publisher does science fiction. And
Yeah.
also, I guess most of all, I thought I might be good at it, because I
Mhm.
don't, I like fantasy, I like science fiction, I like horror. I don't
Mhm.
necessarily think I would be good in any of those genres. Whereas I always had this feeling that my writing style, which is quite character based, quite sort of contemporary, I suppose, like
Mhm.
very kind of earthy,
Mhm.
and pacey, would maybe benefit, and dark, a little bit dark, like the
Mm.
fact that
Yeah.
I'm not attracted to cozy crime or anything like that. But I thought that maybe crime is the genre for me where I could really flourish.
Yeah.
And I was just chucking some ideas around in my head about, what kind of book I would like to write. And I remember writing 5 ideas, and this one was easily the one that grabbed me the most. The others were just kind of like, well, that's an okay plot, but
Mm.
do I want to spend much time on it? This one really, I didn't even know the character. It was the character of Mercy. I didn't know the
Mhm.
plot. The character of Mercy just popped in my head. And I remember thinking,
Right.
I really want to write about her. Again, going
Yeah.
back to your first question, that thought of like, I want to see the world through someone else's eyes. And I think
Yeah.
she's interesting. And I think
Yeah.
I'm curious to see what her voice is. So
Yeah.
that was kind of the
Yeah.
reason, really.
I like that. I'm curious about voice, because you mentioning that there was a struggle moving from the Dodger books into finding this new voice, and I definitely can understand that. Similar to you, I had kind of a similar journey where I was writing Victorian pastiche,
Oh, yeah.
and then moved away to write modern day. Well, then I moved away to end up writing historical noir, and now I'm writing modern day
Yeah.
thriller.
You
But
reminded me of something. Sorry to interrupt, but
yeah,
when we first met, which was a capital crime, I'm going to say it was
mm,
2019, and we got
2019,
chatting,
yeah, yeah,
and we realized that we had loads in common, because we both
yeah,
published novels with Victorian characters that pre-exist, that we'd
yes,
written, and that was over for both of us. And we were both
yes,
currently writing private eye novels, where
yeah,
in both instances, both our stories had the main private eye was investigating the murder of their father, which was like a really weird,
yes,
like, wow,
yeah,
it's like my American thing. Like,
yeah.
it's like, it
That's
was a
true.
weird, yeah.
that
But
was
yeah,
that was it was that was weird. That was fun though. That was pretty
yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah.
But so yeah, so for you, for finding the new voice, I mean,
Hmm.
how was that? What were the struggles of kind of breaking off the shackles of writing like a Victorian,
Yeah.
slum kid, and
Well,
finding a new contemporary voice?
firstly, I've got to say, even though I love the Dodger books, and I think the third one's great, even though no one else has read it, I have to say there was part of me, because it was such a defeating experience of realizing,
Yeah.
like, okay, this is just not going anywhere. By the time I finished the third one and handed it in, because they did offer me a fourth one, and I turned it down because the money was so terrible. But
Uh,
pre my guy getting, pre them shutting down the imprint, and I remember thinking, I'm sick of this voice. Like, I am proud of the books now, and I'm
mm,
reading them back. But I had spent quite a few years writing in a kind of very particular voice, and I remember thinking, I want to write someone else, and more importantly, actually, I really want to write a character that I invented, and not something that
right.
invented by a more famous author.
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
knew that people were looking down on me a bit like that. Like, so, oh, this is like fan fiction. It's like Dickens fan fiction. And I kind of like, I
Mm,
really want to write my own person. And I had this idea initially of maybe I should switch voices, because I like all my short stories prior to the and Dodger were all first person. I was a real voice guy. I'd get a
yeah.
character with a voice that would kind of mimic, almost like ventriloquism. I would kind of
Mm,
do the voice of the character, and that would be my way in. I thought, no, be a bit more grown up this time. Be a big boy. Do third person. Write like a serious novelist. Like, I was like,
yeah.
let's do the classic novel. Let's do the classic third person novel. Lots of different
Mm,
characters. That will open it up for me. It
mm,
felt like to me, like when you've got one voice and everything's being told from one character specifically, it's
yeah.
like you're filming a movie with one camera where everything's from this person's perspective. Suddenly, third person, you can jump around from different people's heads. It's suddenly like you've got 3 cameras on the scene, so that you can have
Yes.
what they're thinking. I found it incredibly freeing. I remember reading back the early chapters of Mercy. One of
Mm,
the things about jumping from characters' perspective, every chapter is a new different perspective for a bit.
yeah.
And I think that was partly because I was just loving, I'm this person. Now I'm that
Right.
person. And that was incredibly appealing.
Yeah.
It was difficult, But I think once I established my kind of third person voice, and that is
Mm,
its own voice, the third person narrator has his
definitely.
or her own style. They have their sense of humor. They have they
Yeah.
have their tone. Once I'd established mine was for Ask for Mercy, I actually found it incredibly easy to just jump around. And I like
Right.
that thing that a lot of novelists have where you can do third person, but if you're doing a scene where you're quite close in your particular character's head, you can
Mm,
kind of write the lines as if the character's saying them. You can chuck
yes.
in a swear word if you think your character would think of a swear word. Tonally, it seems right, or a slang word or whatever.
Yes.
You can
Sure.
still
Yeah.
play with voice.
Yeah.
But I'll be honest with you, Luke. That was my favorite thing about the early. I loved changing gears and
Yeah.
changing my writing style. I think the next book I write, I kind of want to do it again. I kind of want to. I don't know. I'm going to start writing a psychological thriller soon. I've already got the idea for it, and I quite like the idea of like multiple narrators, like different first, because I've never
Yeah.
done that before. We switch,
Oh, that'll be
just
fun.
because it's nice to just try change it up every now and then.
Yeah.
So actually, I found it quite easy, if I'm honest.
I like that. So kind of building off that a little bit as well is again you found a new voice, but not only did you find a new voice, you chose a new subgenre of crime. You're not doing historical crime. You're doing PI thriller, not police
Yes.
procedural, not domestic noir, whatever the hell that is.
Mhm. Yeah.
None of that. It's a PI novel set in modern day.
Yeah.
Why not do a police procedural? Why have it be a private detective?
Yeah, it's funny because I love, and I know you love the private eye genre. I love the tradition of
Mm,
Marlowe and
yeah,
Chandler and this kind of thing. And I like,
they're
as
all behind me.
all behind you. Yeah, I know you're a way bigger fan than I am, but I love that. Again, like we were saying earlier, that idea of the private eye as being slightly, slightly like not quite. I mean, they're real. Private eyes exist in this world, private detectives.
Yeah,
But there's something slightly heightened about the idea of a private detective solving a murder. There's something very romantic about it almost, because it's
yeah,
kind of like in real life, that's not what they do. And it's not what they
yeah,
do in my book. It just that happens she's got this own personal murder mystery that she's trying to solve. But the actual job is not really about that. And I think that to me made it a bit more relatable than I like books that are told from the point of view of a policeman, but there's part of me thinks there's a lot of them, and
yeah,
I don't know if I don't relate to policemen, but I sort of think I don't
no,
know if I necessarily want to spend an entire book imagining the world through the eyes of a copper, really, because
yeah,
partly because
yeah,
things are a little bit more limited, as I was saying earlier. They can't break the rules, or I mean, they can,
yeah,
but
yeah,
it's difficult for you to do that and build a series out of it. I just thought the idea of her, this character, Mercy Tyler, I just thought the type of person she is, she wouldn't be a cop. The type of person she is, she wouldn't really be a criminal, but she would be a private eye. Like that was
right,
kind of how I was
yeah,
thinking. Like I say, I love the idea of, I guess it's the thing of me about, like, I love classic literature like Dickens and stuff. The idea of playing a new modern book set within our world, set within, the book's set within 2020, but with a kind of old-fashioned formal genre, like the private eye
mm,
genre, where there is a form. And like there's a form to Agatha Christie, there's a form to the kind of hard-boiled cops of like they've got this mystery. There's a real kind of like the mystery is presented at the beginning, there's an investigation phase, and then there's the reveal at the end. And
yeah,
like I really wanted to stick to the form as much as possible and kind of throw my hat into the ring of that kind of writing and see, well, what's my version of that classic
yeah,
crime mystery thriller? And
yeah,
this book is the answer to that question. This is my version of it.
nice.
So yeah,
Um, Also curious when you 'cause you mentioned that kind of Mercy kind of came to you, and then you kind of wanted to explore that character. So was it in terms of like the story? Were you thinking more thematically at the beginning,
yeah,
like thematically what you wanted to do with Mercy more than anything else?
yeah. I think I wanted her. Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. I wanted her to be investigating the. So the story is, I don't know if I've already said this.
No,
Mercy
no,
is a
no.
young.
Yeah, tell us.
Yeah, because now this is a good opportunity for me to say Mercy Tyler is a young woman. She's 29 at the beginning of the book,
Mm,
and she's just returned to London from Barcelona, where she's been
mm,
for 5 years. She's estranged from her father. She loves her father very much, but he's a difficult guy. He's a bit dodgy, and
mm.
he's a private investigator. He dies at the first couple of pages of the book, and we, the audience, are told that he's been murdered. Nobody else believes that he's been murdered apart from Mercy. and there's a
Mm.
reason why she believes he's murdered. She overheard a conversation that he had with a hitman when he was much younger, when she was much younger, where she believes that conversation, that hitman, she never saw the guy, she heard his voice from behind a
Mm.
curtain. She thinks that guy is responsible for the death of her father. Her father
Yeah.
refers to this man as the Long Needle, and she spends most of the book trying to work out who the Long Needle is, and
Mm.
therefore to uncover who her father's crime is. So she comes back. The first thing that happens is she inherits one half of a private detective agency from her father.
Mm.
Immediately sets about trying to work out who had him killed. The other half of the agency is owned by her godfather, a man named Bill, who in many
Mm.
ways is actually a better father to her, a better father
Mm.
figure than her
Mm.
actual father. So in answer to your question, that's the main setup. Bill and Mercy kind of form an unlikely alliance to find out who this mystery hitman is, because nobody else
Mm.
believes it's Mercy. In answer to your question, I think the theme that was immediately attractive to me, and I didn't have that plot immediately, was the
Mm.
idea of a young person, younger than me, young person in their 20s, investigating the murder of a father, and therefore, by extension, investigating her parents, investigating
Mm.
her dad, who is this dodgy guy, who's got a lot of criminal friends, the friends of her parents, who many of whom are some very dangerous criminals,
Mm.
investigating Bill, her godfather, investigating her mother. And I like the thematic idea of a kind of 21st century person investigating 20th century parents and looking at the old,
Yeah.
digging up the old stones and thinking, what was going on when you were young, and how might the sort of choices you made and the sins you committed when you were younger, any of you, might have led to my father's murder earlier this year.
Mm.
So it's kind of, I guess, a bit like your book, where it's like the idea of a child investigating their parents' murder. Now, that
Yeah.
wouldn't necessarily happen if it was a cop. I mean, there are
No.
novels where cops investigate their parents' murder, but I
Yeah.
liked the personal nature of it. She's not
Yeah.
just investigating any old murder. She's investigating her own background, her own family, and that is hopefully gives it a sort of an emotional edge that it might
Yeah.
not have had otherwise.
I agree.
So
I loved that angle of the book quite a lot. 'Cause I think it's something that you and I both did that with our books, which is pure
yeah,
coincidental. But it's also something that if you look at just the PI genre in general,
yeah,
the PI normally gets emotionally invested in whatever case they're on. But very rarely is the case personal to the PI. We never have a case where like Marlowe is investigating something to do with his family, or Sam Spade and his family, or there's a few sort of vague connections with Robert B. Parker Spencer and like his wider family every once in a while. But that stuff is very sort of always kind of kept at a bit of a distance. I would say Sarah Pretsky's novels have a bit more family connection to some of their stuff, but like Sue Grafton's work, again, that family distance is very distant. So I like that you did that. I like that because it added that emotional element that
yeah,
was
yeah.
quite engaging, I thought.
It's not dissimilar to yours. The idea of like, yeah, I
Mm.
love the idea of like children investigating their parents. I don't know why. I love the idea of, because
Yeah.
that's history. That is going back into
Yes.
recent history and uncovering the past and what
Yeah.
don't want people want, what what don't people. I don't know why I've just
Yeah.
suddenly had a absolute brain fart on that sentence.
I do
But
that all the
what
time.
covering up? Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's like Mercy's got a really difficult relationship with her father. She loves him, and they're actually quite similar,
Mm.
but he's a difficult guy, and they are estranged. They haven't really spoken much in 5 years.
Yes.
Sorry, that's on the phone. I'll shut that off. Turn it on silent. They haven't really spoken in 5 years. I'm not going to explain why they haven't spoken, but that's kind of an early surprise, and that's
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
a big part of the book. Is
Yeah.
that actually she's almost proving something to him by saying,
Yeah.
"I reckon I can solve your murder," and that's almost proving to him that you've underestimated me. I'm the one person that's going to
Yeah.
uncover, it's going to get you justice, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was very appealing, and that was, as I say, this is thematic stuff we're talking about here and story stuff. It wasn't plot stuff. The plot came later. Like actually working out who had killed him was the thing that I kind of had to really. I don't know about you, but I think I'm good at plot if I really apply myself, but it doesn't come naturally. The plot stories
Yep.
occur to me very easily. Characters occur to me very easily. Dialogue occurs to me very easily, but plot I have to work at. I really have to get the
Yeah.
pen. I have to do concentrated thinking.
Yeah.
But I always had an idea of basically the shape of the story and the kind of emotional quality that I wanted it, the emotional journey that I knew she wanted to go on, rather
Yeah.
than the ins and outs. So
Yeah.
I invented the story as I was going, and then on a rewrite, kind of
Yeah.
smoothed it out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I'm with you on that a little bit. I'm very I'm good and bad with plot, but it's constructing the story is probably one of my strongest suits, which is why I'm so hypercritical when I go and watch these stupid movies and watch these
yeah.
TV shows.
You're good at
And like
yeah,
I'm like, why are they not doing this? Well, you set this up, you didn't do that. Why are you saying this when you just said that?
yeah.
So that, but I will say, even with my own stuff, like I do have to, it doesn't necessarily come to me like super naturally. I do have to sit
Work.
there and really think and rethink and write and rewrite to make sure what I'm doing. But I think that's probably the same with most people who are their strong suit is still plot. Is it's you kind of
Yeah,
throw some stuff out there on the page and then you kind of fix it and polish it and get it looking nice over time, and just
do
making sure
you
there's no inconsistencies.
do you know when you, because I read your book, and I've also read a recent short story you wrote. It was kind of a
Yes.
novella.
Yeah.
It was again a private eye novel. Do you know who the killer is when you start out? Like, do you decide before you write that first sentence? Do you know it's gonna be
Sometimes.
such and such? Sometimes, yeah,
Sometimes
yeah.
the short story that you recently read, I had a vague I did know who was going to be responsible for doing something bad to the victim. So that one was something I definitely thought of before I started writing the story. The historical thriller that you read a while back, I didn't really fully know who did what to my protagonist's
Well,
dad, and that was something I had to sort of work out over the course of the rewrites and things like that.
it's harder with a
Um,
long novel. Yeah, it's hard. Like
yes,
a short story. I recently
definitely.
wrote something called "Find the Needle," which is a sort of prequel to "Ask for Mercy,"
Yes.
which is kind of I put online as a free book for anyone who wants it, who signs up to my newsletter. Not plugging it, but if you
No,
go to
plug it,
my
man.
get it free. But that, like, similar to your story that you wrote, is short, and
Yeah.
that was much easier because I basically broke it down to 8 chapters. That was much easier for me to work out every beat of it because it's only eight
Yeah.
chapters. I can think in 8 chapters. I can't think in 32 chapters. I have to discover
Yeah.
32 chapters.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that was the big difference. But
Well, I think it was Val Mc. Go on.
I always knew basically who the killer was. I didn't
Yeah.
always know why.
Yeah, I was
Like,
gonna say because you've been reading some Val McDermott at least recently,
yeah,
and she at
I'm a
one
big
point made a comment about how like when she writes it's like headlights in the fog. How she can
yeah.
just kind of see as far as that,
Oh
and
yeah.
you just keep going, and whatever comes along around the bend, you just sort of deal
You know
with.
what the next chapter is. Hopefully, by the time you finish that next chapter, you'll know what the next chapter is, and
Yeah.
eventually you're going to get to the end. You can have an
Yes.
idea of it. But I also think, especially with the Dodger books, I know, like, of the people who read the books, a lot of people told me what their favorite bit was in the entire series, and it
Yeah.
was always the same bit. People would say, "I love this bit," and it's a scene in Dodger of the Dials, and I won't say what it is because it's kind of a surprise.
Yeah.
But I know that was not. I got that idea 2 chapters prior to writing it. That was not part of my original plan at all. My
Right.
publisher didn't know I was going to do that, and I
Yeah.
think for a lot of people, it seems to be the most interesting chapter in the book, and it was
Right.
a thing. So even if you overly plot, you don't leave enough room for that
Mm.
spontaneous idea. You suddenly get halfway through,
Yeah.
you think, "Oh, that's the best idea I've had yet," and I'm halfway
Yes.
through the thing. Like, and you always need to, it's good to plot and to have a good idea where you're going. You always need that loose thing of like, if I get a really good
Yeah.
idea, there's room for it. I can chuck off another idea and sit that idea in, and the engine will hum better.
I agree. I think the best way to write a book or a screenplay is really to have your log line, right? Like
yeah,
have your one sentence idea of what the basic element of the story is going to be, and then know your theme really well, and then just
yes,
play with those two things because the log line it teases everything, but it doesn't give everything away. But it gives you an idea of where the story needs to go.
yeah,
And yeah, but
yeah.
I want to move on a little bit now and ask about kind of
Yeah.
publishing and submission woes because
Oh,
we've been on a very long journey
yeah.
with our books. Mine is still out on submission. I got an agent about a year and a half ago, and or so, and you know, he's got my book with people who say they like it and they're reading it, but you know, it's the publishing industry
Yeah,
and
it's
things
tough.
change
Yeah,
at the
yeah,
drop
yeah,
of a
yeah. It's
hat.
incredibly competitive. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I've yeah, as you know, I've been on a real journey. So, the thing about Us for Mercy is it's coming out at the time of recording. It's coming out in 2 days' time, and I'm so incredibly proud of it for two reasons.
mm,
I genuinely think it's the best book I've ever written, but I'm also proud of it for getting it published because,
yeah,
as you know, I received so many knockbacks from this book from the mainstream publishing world, despite
yes,
having this really strong sense that I know it's good, I know I should get it out there.
yeah,
But for whatever reason, I basically finished the book during the first lockdown, 2020,
yeah,
which is why the book
yeah,
is set in 2020. And then I spent most of 2021 trying and failing to get an agent, and a
yeah,
lot of 2022 trying and failing to get like an independent publisher. And
yeah,
I'm going to tell you, Luke, and this is almost heartbreaking. I can't
mm,
believe. I
mm,
reckon I sent it to 70 agents over a course of a year. Every
yeah,
agent in town. I don't think I sent it to yours, oddly. I don't think it
yeah,
was great in them. But I sent it to every agent, the big ones, the small ones, the flash ones, the ones
yeah,
that do the big novelists, the ones that are a bit more kind of boutiquey.
yeah.
And I'm going to say I got a lot of rejection. I got a lot of people just not replying,
Yes,
and
same.
it was a pretty heartbreaking year. It was a tough year of rejection. I was working on other
Yeah,
things during that time, but I know that it was 2021 was famously a bad time for submitting because everyone wrote a book in lockdown. So there was the
yes,
slush piles were very big, which is why a lot of people, I think it's likely nobody read it.
yeah,
I don't know to this day. They publish it. Agents don't really explain why they would reject a thing. The ones that
mm-mm,
rejected it don't really explain why. I can think of three reasons why that might be. I
mm,
think at one point when I was sending it out, the book was very long. I've since edited it. It's gone through a couple of edits, got
yeah,
it down to a much more manageable length. It's still pretty long, but I don't
yeah.
think ridiculously long. I think it was 700 pages at one point.
It was,
But then I also sort of think an agent should, you know, be like, an agent can still take you up on that and be like, right, we need to cut this down. But like,
yes,
whatever it was, they didn't want to. Maybe it was the premise. Maybe it was the fact that Dodge of the Revolution sold about 10 copies. I don't know why,
yeah,
but I can guess why. But truth is, I don't know why. And it was a
yeah,
tough year. It's pretty brutal. I sent
yeah,
it out to a lot of people. And as you know, like agents, like I get agents, like I get that it's a tough gig for them. I get they're getting a lot of stuff. They've really
yeah,
got a second best market. I think if agents are rejecting you, then it's extremely likely that the mainstream publishers would too, because they
yeah,
know what mainstream publishers want.
yeah,
Um, but it can be kind of heartbreaking where not heartbreaking, but also it's a bit annoying where you go
yeah,
on an agent's website and they'll say something like, "Oh, submit your books, if this, if that, if that." They're a bit haughty, the tone of some of the agents, and they say things like, "If you haven't heard back from us in 4 months, you can assume your submission was unsuccessful." And you think, 4 months, and
yeah,
it's almost makes me think, well, I want you. I don't want an agent, really. I want a publisher. I'm just
yeah,
told that an agent is the guy or girl who's going to get me a publisher. So I'm
yeah,
getting rejections from people that I don't even really want one of these things.
yeah,
I want I want the key to the gate, which is what they've
yes,
got.
yeah,
They can submit it to Penguin Random House and I can't. That's why I
yeah,
want them. And you get people saying things like in the rejections, they say things like, "Oh, good luck with it elsewhere. We found things to enjoy about it. Good luck with it elsewhere. Every agent is different." And then, but actually, if you get 70 agents rejections in one year, you
how
realize
different are
they're
they?
not that fucking different. Like they've all got
Yeah,
very similar names. They all kind of seem to have, my books are kind of like, they're not like middle class books. They're not
mm,
like everyone rejecting my book had a very, very posh name. And I think, well, I didn't write it for all the, Felicities and Hugos and Gileses, but those are the people rejecting my book. I don't know if this book or the Dodger books were particularly aimed at you, but you're the people I need to get past. And
yeah,
even though they are all different, they're all thinking the same way. They're all second guessing the same market. They're all reading
mm,
the same rules. So at a certain
yeah,
point, you realize actually, if 10 of them have rejected you, probably the next 10 are going to reject you. At least that's been my
yeah,
experience.
yeah,
And it was pretty depressing because I'd had, going back to what I was talking about at the beginning of the show, because I'd been so spoiled early on with that
mm,
agent giving me the card. The publisher gave me a 2-book deal based on 5 chapters. I was
yeah,
genuinely stunned that an entire book I'd, worked so hard on,
yeah,
I thought was great. Like I had
Yeah.
such self-belief in, was being
Yeah.
rejected out of hand by some people who I don't think even read it particularly, or they didn't read much beyond it. I gave them the synopsis. I did the
Yeah.
pitch. I think maybe there was something wrong with my pitching at the time. Maybe there still is. Or maybe they just didn't like the book for various reasons. There's some controversial stuff in the book that I think the publishing industry finds a bit hot to handle, and I don't want to give away what
Possibly.
that is,
Yeah.
but that I think is a factor.
Yeah.
But I'll never know. And it was just a bit like, oh my God, so I'm not, this isn't going to get published.
Yeah.
And I don't know what else to do about it. And that was around the time where I started I started hearing about self-publishing. I started
Mm.
listening to it. Maybe that is for me. I don't really understand self-publishing.
Yeah.
Self-publishing has such a stigma attached to it. And it's a stigma
Mm.
that even I, someone who's about to self-publish, still sort of believe in, which is that the self-publishing world is full of badly edited books aimed at an undiscerning reader. And I think that's an unfair description of a lot of self-publishing books, but I think
Yeah.
that's the stigma a lot of people have about them.
It is.
But
Yeah.
because I've been so beaten up by the mainstream publishing world, and really, like, I've got the spreadsheet. I've seen my 70, rejection. I was like, I think I've got that a little bit of an attitude of like, if somebody says no, I think, well, there's more than one way in. I'm going to go in around the back. And
Yeah.
I thought to myself, I'm going to start to educate myself about self-publishing. And this is where you come into the story, because you and I and a friend of ours called James Pearson and a friend of mine called Sarah, we all decided to go to a self-publishing event. Do you remember this? In
Yep.
South Bank Centre,
Oh
summer
boy.
of last year. Because I think none of us at that time really knew anything about it, but we knew a couple of things. We
Yeah.
knew that some people had been incredibly successful with it financially.
Yeah.
I knew that per book, a per book sale, the author gets a lot more money with a self-published book. They get a lot more profit because
Yep.
obviously they self-published it. So there isn't a retailer, because if you're selling it as an ebook, if you're selling it online, you don't have a retailer to deal with. You don't have an agent taking 15%. You don't have a publisher taking the bulk
Yeah.
of it. But actually, if you can make it work, it can be quite lucrative, at
Yes.
least per sale. I knew that there was a thing that was very attractive, especially after my Dodger experience, was that the sales that you get, even if they're relatively modest, you get them pretty quickly. Somebody buys my book tomorrow, I get the money for that in 2 months' time. Sounds like a lot, but in mainstream publishing, you're lucky if you get that within a year, basically. Like, you get your advance, but even that is sort of like drip fed you a little bit over a period of,
Yeah.
I reckon it took me 2 years to get paid for Dodger and the full amount, and it wasn't a lot of money. Like, it's not like, so I think that's very appealing. And the other thing that's very appealing about self-publishing to me, as someone who at that point didn't know much about it, and this is probably, looking back, having done it, is the best thing about it, is the control. The fact that I control how much the book sells for, the book that I've got access to all the data. I can see how well it's selling. I can see if it's a good month, a bad month, a good week, a bad me. I can alter the ad. I'm doing the adverts myself, the Facebook ads. I'm doing, I can alter things. I can change the cover if the cover isn't working. I'm in charge in a way that I never was with the Dodger books. I had people saying to me all the time, your Dodger ebooks are quite expensive, are they? Aren't they? Why are they all £5.99? And I was like, I don't know why they're all £5. I'm not in charge of that. I don't know why this book about, a popular character that's kind of a, popular genres. It's action, it's funny, it's this, they are, it's like, I don't know why that's priced up like it's flipping Wolf Hall. I don't know. Like, I'm not in control. I don't know. So the control that you got, those were the three things that I found very attractive about self-publishing. And the sort of, I don't want to be bitter about mainstream publishing and agents and stuff, but the sort of FU of like, I'm doing it myself. I'm going to sail this ship alone. Like, that was appealing to me. And so the four of us, including you, we went to a self-publishing show. And let me ask you, what was your impression of that event? Because I know you and I had very different responses to it.
I mean, briefly, my opinion of it was that it was I can't remember if who someone had gone before and told us that, like, I don't know. I went there expecting to be sort of introduced, like, for an introduction, and I felt like I was coming into the second year of an MA program. That
is
I'm
how
like, I don't know what the hell is going on. What you're talking about is
way
not
above
for me. Yeah.
Yeah, they were talking about words like ASINs and reader magnets and metadata, and they were talking about like stuff. They were talking about AI a lot, which is the thing I
Yeah,
remember. And this
that
is all
pissed
a
me
bit
off quite a
turn
bit,
off.
actually. I didn't like any of that. That was
Yeah. And
very
also some of
uncomfortable.
the successful authors that were coming on at that show were people that struck me as like a little bit kind of lost. I don't like it when people parade around like essentially millionaires, sort of like this person's
Yeah,
done amazingly well, because I know that the odds are that most people in the room, and that's not going to happen. I feel like the last scene at the end of Wolf of Wall Street, where the guy, you know, Jordan Belfort's trying to sell people a pen, and you got all the people in the audience who think they're going to be as successful as him. I felt like,
yeah.
is the real money being made in self-publishing being made by these guys selling tickets to this show? That's kind of like, there was that uh, aspect to it. But despite that, I think it's fair to say that of the four of us, I was easily the most persuaded by it. Rightly or
Mm,
wrongly, I was the one that thought, I think I can do this. I think this is
yeah,
right for me. I think I can work it out. And I am not a tech person. I am someone that really struggles with anything online. So the idea that I've now got to learn about formatting a book, the three
yeah,
important things. Well, you've got to edit the book first, which I can do. You've got to hire a cover designer, which I did, and I'm really happy with my cover, professional
yeah.
cover designer that I got through the course. That he was one of the people that spoke at that thing,
Yes.
and then but then the tech element of like getting it online, getting your emailing list, getting like, you know, it formatted. So I didn't have a website. I was really like a real Luddite and all this stuff, and having to do all that, I knew I wasn't going to be good at that. Or targeted ads, I knew that that wasn't going to come naturally. I knew ads weren't going to come naturally. There was a lot of elements of it, or even just understanding Amazon and the algorithm and how that
Mm,
works. When people talk about it, it's like the sea. It's like, how do I get it
yeah,
blowing in my direction? I don't know. Like, and it
yeah,
seems like nobody really knows, but everybody's obsessing on it. So
yeah,
you're right. That first impressions on that festival on the first day was annoying, where it was like, I don't really understand what anyone's talking about, and it seems like maybe it's a bit of a racket.
yeah,
But
yeah,
there were a couple
yeah,
of things. I did the 2 day event. I think you guys did the first day. It
yeah,
was badly handled because the second day was better for the beginner. It was a bit better, like
yeah,
basically breaking down how you can do this. I I signed up to a course, which I got to say was like 600 quid, but I've now
yeah.
done,
It's
which
pricey. Yeah,
is like talks me through every single element, and there were really good modules, and that was extremely clear. I would recommend that course, even though it's quite a lot of money, to
yeah,
anyone who's thinking about self-publishing, because it did unlike that show we saw, it did demystify every step of the self-publishing journey.
yeah,
So, for example, a big thing in self-publishing is giving your books away incredibly cheaply, if or even free, or giving away a reader magnet, which is what I wrote, Find the Needle, a little story I was mentioning earlier. Giving it away free so that people sign up to your email list, so that you know who your fans are, and in future you can market to those people. To me, that just felt all very complicated and very annoying.
yeah,
I actually, after having done it and having written a story that I'm now actually pretty proud of, I'm actually finding writing an email every month just to everyone who's still on my newsletter, to be
yeah,
actually quite fun. I prefer it to most social media activity, to be honest with you, because it's like,
yeah,
all right, I can communicate with people who I know because they've signed up for my email list, are interested in my book. So
yeah,
there was that sort of element suddenly started to demystify it. And the main thing that demystified it, after all that sort of metadata chat, after all the kind of AI talk, after all kind of it's the new digital platform, is
yeah.
when it suddenly became clear is that when you break it down, it's about advertising. If you've got the capital to invest
Yes.
in a decent advertising campaign,
Yep.
you're going to sell more books. Like every other business since the beginning of time. When the minute they started explaining it in sort of like old-fashioned terms, I was like, I get it. I need an ad campaign. And this day you've got
Yep.
an targeted
Yeah.
ad campaign. So this is actually suddenly in my brain.
Yeah.
That was almost the light bulb moment. I get it.
Yeah.
You know, at
Yeah.
the moment, I'm about to launch a book and I haven't got any money for an ad campaign. But when I do, I'll
When
be
I
leaving.
do, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
I commend you, man, for taking the jump and
Thank
doing the
you.
self
You were very
publishing
supportive.
thing. Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah,
think the book is great. I'm glad you're getting it out there. I think there's merit in self-publishing, just like I think there's merit in traditional publishing. But I think if you can do it, if you've got the gumption and you got the ability to put the time and the effort and the finance into it, um,
yeah.
there is a possibility it could
It's
be worthwhile because a lot of times traditionally published people aren't really, no matter how much flash they throw out there and they're at all the panels and they're at all the events and a lot of them aren't making a lot of money. Let's
yeah, yeah.
realistically
That's
they're
what I
not.
mean. I wasn't. That's the thing.
Yeah,
Anything negative you could say about self-publishing also applies to mainstream publishing. And
it does. Yeah,
you need another income. Well, you need another
yeah.
income. Like you need to have money already to be self-published. Well, really, the
Yeah.
money that mainstream publish, but you kind of need another income, really.
Yeah,
So
and a lot of times, even with traditionally published stuff, you really shouldn't even be submitting to agents unless you have paid for someone to you edited your book already. They
edit,
really want the polished thing, which to me is ridiculous. But
yeah, I mean, to me, if
it's
I'm doing that,
yeah,
if I'm paying for the editor and I'm paying,
yeah,
all this stuff, and I'm like, and like you said earlier, a lot of people are paying for their own ad campaigns.
yeah,
Again, what is the mainstream publisher for, really? It is
yeah,
it is tough. I'm not going to pretend it's been easy. I would say I budgeted amount of time and effort and money that I would put into this, and now that I've done it, it's taken me about 6 months. I reckon it's
yeah,
taken me twice as long as I thought it would, and it's been twice as expensive. That's the
yeah,
reality of it. Because I don't want to
yeah,
be someone that is like selling self-publishing in the same way that it was sold to me. As I
yeah.
say, my book is at time of recording is out at the end of this week, so I have no idea whether this is going to be worth it. I don't know how it's going to
Fingers
be.
crossed it will.
Ask me this time next year whether it was worth it. I'm
Yeah,
hoping it's
yeah.
going to be. But and let me ask you this: have you been tempted to self-publish your book? Are you?
I mean, there is a temptation there. There is a temptation, but I'll cross that bridge at a later time. It might be something that I do more with my new book than my old book. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, it's a great book, so people deserve to read it. And if I
Yeah.
can, anything I learned, including my mistakes, and I've already made a ton of them, I'm happy to share and let people know. And if anybody listening to this is interested in self-publishing, contact me through social media, because I'm quite happy to be very honest about the do's and don'ts that I've already discovered.
Yeah.
So do
How can that's probably a good time, because we need to sort of unfortunately wrap it up a bit. But yeah, where can people find you if they want to reach out and ask you about self-publishing, or if they want to tell you how much they loved Ask for Mercy? Where can people find
yeah.
you?
Yeah, well, I'd love that. Well, I'm on Twitter at @JHenryBenmore, although Twitter's awful these days. I'm also I can't remember my names, but I'm on Blue Sky, and I'm on what's the other one called? Threads. I'm on Instagram, James_Benmore. I'm very and I've got a website, james-benmore.com, where you can sign up to my email and get a free book, Find the Needle, for free. You can buy all my books from there. There are links to all the Amazon pages, etc. And you can contact me through there if you would like to talk to me. So yeah, pretty much most of the social medias I'm on. It won't.
Nice.
It's not hard to find me, and my book is available. All of the books are available on Amazon as of now, in both ebook, paperback, and hardback.
Yes, indeed.
So I'd love to hear from you.
Wonderful. James, this was a lot of fun. I'm glad we got to chat about Ask for Mercy, Dodger, all this stuff, the complications of publishing. It's great fun, man.
It's a trial. And lovely to speak to you again as well. I haven't seen you in
too,
ages.
buddy. I look forward to bringing you back on, hopefully with some, your next book and some updates
and maybe
for
I'll
Ask
have
for Mercy
more,
and stuff like that.
I can tell you, get a bit more authority on whether or not self-publishing is a waste of time or not, from my perspective.
Because
maybe it will be, and maybe it won't be. And yeah, I'll let you know.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Cool. Yeah, you're welcome. Cheers, buddy. Thanks everyone for listening, and I'll be back next week with another fantastic guest. See you later.
The Secret Circle.